Mosaic II, Listening and Speaking, Assessment Tests. Chapter 1, Section 1, Listening to a Conversation.
Some languages are easier to learn than others.
How so?
Well, in some languages, such as Spanish, the letters of the alphabet are almost always allocated the same sound. But in others, such as English, a single letter can be pronounced a lot of different ways. English has 26 letters, but more than 40 different sounds.
Oh, I know what you mean. And some languages share a lot of words with other languages. For example, if you already know Spanish, you can figure out a lot of Italian words. Not all Italian words are Spanish cognates, but a lot of them are, and it makes it easy for Spanish speakers to learn Italian.
And then there are pairs of languages that are totally dissimilar, like English and Chinese. Nothing, not the alphabet, not the vocabulary, not the grammar, nothing is the same between those two. My friend Larry has been living in China for 2 years, and he can hardly say a word.
Section 2, Listening to a Lecture.
Today's lecture is going to be about phrasing and pausing. Learning to use pauses effectively is one of the most important things you will learn in this Public Speaking 101 course. A pause is a break, or a point at which you stop speaking. When you write, you use a comma or a period to indicate a pause. However, when you are speaking, you have to use your voice to punctuate what you are saying. The way pauses are used differs from speaker to speaker and from situation to situation. But however they are used, they are just as important for clear communication as are the words you use.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're getting at.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that allowing spaces between your sentences can make it easier for others to understand what you're saying. For instance, actors and actresses are very aware of the power of the pause and use it constantly to increase the effectiveness of the words they are saying, and we can learn a lot from them. They are trained in the use of 3 types of pauses: the short pause, the spontaneity pause, and the long pause. The short pause is the kind of pause I mentioned before. It lasts from a second to 2 seconds. It gives you a chance to catch your breath, and it gives the listeners a chance to absorb what you've just said. It's good to include a short pause right after each of the ideas in your presentation that you want to emphasize. If you run all of your ideas together, it's sometimes hard for your audience to know where one idea leaves off and a new one starts. The spontaneity pause isn't really spontaneous. In fact, it is usually carefully thought out. The purpose of this type of pause is to keep your presentation from sounding too mechanical. When you include a spontaneity pause, you act as if the pause was unplanned. You might seem to be searching for the right word or phrase to use. However, if you are well prepared, you already know exactly what you're going to say. This pause just helps make the presentation sound less rehearsed and more personal.
Excuse me, I didn't follow that last part. Could you go over it again, please?
Of course. What I meant was, the spontaneity pause is carefully planned in such a way that it helps your listener understand what you are saying. Now, the third type of pause is the long pause. It usually lasts 5 seconds or more, and it is very powerful. The emptiness provides a sudden, stark contrast to the flow of speech that came before it. Pauses like this get listeners' attention. The long pause gives them time to think over what they've just heard and encourages them to get ready for the next idea. So, as you prepare your speeches for next week, I'd like each of you to think about including several short pauses, 1 or 2 spontaneity pauses, and a long pause or 2. Experiment with it at home and see how it feels. Feel free to call or email me at my office if you have any questions. Learning to use pauses is one of the most important things you can learn in this class.
Chapter 2, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
I've been wondering why some seemingly normal people get involved in risky situations, like my neighbor, Sally. She has a nice husband, 3 kids who are doing well in school, and a job that she loves. But just last week, she was arrested for shoplifting.
Shoplifting?
Yeah. She stole a box of pens from an office supply store, and the security guard caught her.
How did you find out?
Well, they actually arrested her. She called me from the police station and asked me to watch her kids until she could get home.
Did you talk to her about it?
Of course. She said there's something about shoplifting that is really exciting to her. The possibility of getting caught makes her feel really daring. She says the danger gives her a thrill like nothing else in her life. It's not that anything's wrong with her life. It's just kind of predictable and boring.
So is she going to talk to the police about it?
No way. She's seeing a psychologist, and that seems to be helping. But she said that the danger and the excitement it brings about are hard for her to ignore.
Wow.
Section 2. Listening to a lecture. Welcome to the lecture you've all been waiting for. How to have fun and get paid big bucks for it. In previous classes in Psychology 101, we've discussed how people's motivations cause them to make the kinds of decisions that they do. We found that early childhood experiences, current feelings, and hopes for the future all feed into the decision-making process. Today we'll examine one aspect of how people make a decision about choosing their life's work. We've previously studied the motivations of people who get involved in dangerous recreational activities because they enjoy the excitement of risking their lives. Skydivers, bungee jumpers, and others who engage in extreme sports say they only feel really alive when they are in a precarious situation. A situation in which, ironically, there is some chance they won't come out alive. There is another group of people who deliberately get involved in scary situations which put their lives at risk. These are the people who choose risky jobs. For these people, the primary motivation may not be to involve themselves in dangerous situations. They may want the financial rewards that come with some of these jobs. Or they may feel that the job itself is useful and contributes something important to society. Another aspect of dangerous work is that very few people want to do it. There are always high-risk job openings, even when the economy is in trouble. In addition, the rate of pay for dangerous work is almost always far higher than it is for more routine work situations. It's a fact that some professions involve a lot of risk, and some workers die at much higher rates than others. One of the professions that carries a higher than usual risk of death is that of a pilot. We usually think about pilots as well-paid, happy-go-lucky flyers, traveling from one exciting place to another without a worry. The statistics tell another story. Being a commercial pilot is the 3rd riskiest job in the U.S., with 70 deaths per 100,000 workers. Many of the deaths occur in difficult flying situations found in such places as Alaska, where the weather combines with the other risks inherent in flying to raise the death rate dramatically. You might guess that the most dangerous job is that of a firefighter or a police officer. Guess again. At the top of the list in the U.S. are timber cutters. These are the men that go into the forests to cut down trees for the lumber industry. In one recent year, their fatality rate was 122 deaths per 100,000 workers, the highest of any type of occupation. The number 2 most dangerous job is fishing. No, not sitting in a rowboat on a Saturday afternoon. These commercial fishermen go out into the ocean in small and large ships in all kinds of weather to bring back large catches for the seafood industry. The fatality rate for this group was 108 deaths per 100,000 workers. So when you're thinking about what you want to do for a living, it might be a good idea to check the safety statistics for that profession. You might be surprised at what you find out. Chapter 3, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
You know, Richard, I've been reading about rites of passage in primitive cultures in my anthropology class, and they're really interesting. But I have a hard time figuring out what kinds of rites of passage exist in the United States today.
Well, I just finished writing a paper about that topic, and I got an A on it.
That's great news, so you can help me with my questions. What rites of passage do exist in the U.S. today?
Well, I'm sure you're aware of the rites of passage you went through growing up in Mexico, Carmen. I'm sure the ones we have here aren't so different from the ones you had in Mexico. What is the very first thing you can think of that showed you were growing up?
Well, my parents made a big deal out of my first steps. They took a whole bunch of pictures of me taking these little shaky steps across the living room floor.
Mine too. That's an important early rite of passage in most cultures of the world.
Oh, so these things aren't so mysterious? They also made a big deal out of the first day of school. I had to have a fancy new dress, and they took tons of pictures.
That's right. And when I was 6 and learned how to ride a bicycle without the training wheels. Another rite of passage. Something else to show I was no longer a baby.
Oh, that happened to me too.
Our rites of passage were kind of fun, weren't they? Not like having to live in the woods for a week without food or water.
I'll say. I think I understand better now, but I still feel terrible. We had a quiz on this stuff in class, and I failed it. I'm afraid I'm going to fail the course.
I'm so sorry, but I'm sure you'll do much better on the next test.
I'm sure you're right. After talking with you, I do understand the material a lot better.
Section 2. Listening to a lecture.
In today's lecture, we're going to take a look at sex and gender in relationship to how much money people earn. In the past half-century, the number of women in the paid workforce has increased dramatically. In 1950, there were only 18.4 million working women, which represented about 18% of the workforce. Today, there are 65 million working women, and they make up just about half of the workforce. However, women are earning a lot less than men for the same type of work. The salary gap has been closing somewhat over the past few years. However, at the rate things are going, women and men won't be on an equal financial footing until the year 2050. Recent surveys conducted in the United States show that working women in this country earn much less than working men. The authors of the survey claim that, on average, women earn 73 cents for every dollar that men earn. This means that a 25-year-old woman stands to earn about $500,000 less in her working life than a 25-year-old man. The people who conducted the survey based their figures on the U.S. Census data for the year 2000. To some people, these figures are shocking. Why should the sex of the worker determine how much he or she earns on the job? Researchers are looking for the reasons. Are women steered into academic careers that lead to lower-paying jobs? Do most women end up shouldering most of the burden of raising children and taking care of household chores if they get married? Do these domestic responsibilities prevent them from putting in more time on the job and accepting high-paying promotions that would allow them to earn more money? Although everyone agrees that there is a disparity between men's and women's earnings, one group, the Washington-based Employment Policy Foundation, says that the difference isn't really that large. They say that there are problems with the study. For one thing, they claim that it doesn't distinguish between a 22-year-old woman who just graduated from college and a 55-year-old man who's been working for over 30 years. They feel that researchers need to take a closer look at the raw data and do some additional analyses. For example, they say that if you look at single men and women ages 21 to 35 who live alone, there is no significant difference in earnings between the sexes. The Institute for Women's Policy Research agrees that the difference in earning power between men and women is not as great as many people think it is. They suggest that women earn around 88 cents for every dollar a man earns. But this is still not a situation that we should be happy to live with.
Chapter 4, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
Don't you think it's amazing how Martha Stewart has influenced the way Americans think about their homes? Do you know who she is?
I have no idea. Why? What has she done?
Well, her television programs and magazines have shown everyday people that they can create beautiful homes without spending a whole lot of money. They just need to be willing to put some careful thought into it. They need to think about how they live and spend a little time making their homes more attractive.
Oh, now I remember. She's the one who sells a lot of bedding and furniture at Kmart stores. I see it all the time when I go there with my wife. We like to buy the kids' clothes there. The prices are really low. Say, do you know why she decided to sell her fancy goods at an inexpensive store like Kmart?
I couldn't tell you. I guess it's just one of the ways she has chosen to help people fix up their homes. But before she started designing household products, she spent years talking and writing about how to live life more graciously.
Why are some people so worried about things like what color their sheets are? My family does just fine without all that fancy stuff.
Well, you may not want to hear this, but there are a lot of people out there who are making pretty good money, and some of them enjoy spending it on making their homes as attractive and comfortable as possible. Martha Stewart has turned that into a very lucrative industry.
Well, I guess that's okay for some people, but if I had that much money, I'd get a big SUV, take a couple of long vacations every year, and save the rest of it for when I get old.
Well, that sounds good too. Different strokes for different folks.
Section 2. Listening to a Lecture. Today you are going to learn something about aesthetics as it relates to the design of American automobiles. Now, I'm sure you've all heard that old story about Henry Ford. He was the first mass producer of cars in the United States. He told his customers they could buy a Ford in any color they wanted, as long as that color was black. We've certainly come a long way since then. For a long time, cars were pretty utilitarian-looking vehicles. Most of them were black, and most of them were, frankly, pretty ugly. Then, sometime after the Second World War, things began to change. All of a sudden, you could buy a red car or a blue car. For a while in the 1950s, there were even two-tone cars. You could drive a pink and gray Chevrolet or a red and white Ford. At the same time, automobile body styles started to become pretty outlandish. Some people thought the designers were trying to imitate the look of airplanes and jets. Some cars began to sprout wings in the back, and some of them looked like they might take off at any moment. Throughout the 1950s, car makers vied with each other to see who could attract the most buyers with the most innovative and unusual designs. The Edsel had a push-button transmission in the middle of the steering wheel, where the horn usually goes. To put gasoline in a Cadillac, you had to press a button on the huge tail light and then twist it to one side, revealing the gas cap. There were a lot of soft-top convertibles and even a few hard-top convertibles. These didn't work out too well, however. The mechanical devices that operated the tops were known to be very unreliable. The designs were a carefully guarded secret, and there was a big hullabaloo when the new models first went on display. Car makers originally released the new models in January of the model year. However, they gradually moved that date backward until it reached September. The 1960s and 1970s brought about big changes in car design. First of all, there was an energy crisis that made gasoline to run big, fancy cars very expensive. Secondly, people began to realize that big cars meant big pollution, and the environmental movement put pressure on manufacturers to produce smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles. The engineers began to have a bigger say in how cars were built, and this, in turn, influenced how cars looked. Designers were forced to stay within the lines of what the engineers allowed. This meant that by 1980, the typical American car was smaller, less flashy, and decidedly more boring looking. Chapter 5, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
It sure feels good to have both kids out of the house, doesn't it, Mary?
I hate to say this, Frank, but it does. When Don went away to college 3 years ago, I was really upset. He was my first baby, and I didn't think he was ready to face the world alone. But he sure proved me wrong.
I'll say. He's 21 years old already, and he's doing great. And now that Tina has left home to spend 2 years working for Habitat for Humanity in Africa, we're all alone again.
To be honest with you, I've been looking forward to this time for years. We put so much energy into taking care of the kids, staying up nights when they were sick, helping with homework for hours on end, taking them to the sports practices and to friends' houses. I really got fed up sometimes. I thought it would never end.
And now it has. I agree. It sure is nice not to have to feel so responsible all the time. Sometimes, it just feels good to sit around in the evening and read a book without having to worry about where the kids are and what they're doing.
I feel the same way. And yet, sometimes I wish we could do it all over again. It gave me so much pleasure to take care of them and watch them grow up. And now that part of our lives is over. 21 years of raising kids. 23 years of living in the same house. These transitions aren't easy, are they?
No, they aren't. But I think we'll live through it. We still have each other. 27 years of marriage have been good to us.
Oh, I love you, Frank.
Section 2. Listening to a Lecture.
Today's lecture in developmental psychology concerns the transitions that children go through as they approach their second birthday. This period of development is often called the terrible twos, for very good reasons. Although children go through maturational changes at varying rates of speed, there are some general overarching elements that all children have in common. They're like snowflakes. They are the same in many ways, but each is also completely unique. And a child who is more advanced in one area of development is likely to be somewhat behind in another area. For example, an early walker may not be an early talker. This is not something to be concerned about unless the lag becomes extreme. In that case, the child should be seen by a pediatric specialist. The twos are called terrible mostly because of the occurrence of tantrums. These shouting and crying fits are the result of the child's suddenly emerging feelings and sometimes intense mood swings. 2-year-olds are trying very hard to assert their independence, but sometimes they don't have the physical skills, emotional maturity, or language to accomplish what they want. This can be very frustrating. For example, a child may want to dress herself, but not be able to button her own blouse or tie her own shoes. She may want to explain what she wants, but she can't find the right words. She may be all set to go off to preschool on her own and then suddenly feel terribly frightened about leaving her parents. It's not easy being 2. Language is developing quickly in 2-year-olds. They usually have a vocabulary of about 200 words by this age. At first, they're just parrots, but soon they learn to form complex sentences, often using adjectives and adverbs. They can identify objects in pictures and can usually sit still as they listen to an entire story, although it should be a short one at this age. They can usually name the parts of their bodies, such as mouth, nose, finger, and so on. They understand about immediate time concepts, such as yesterday and tomorrow, but don't yet comprehend what next month or next year are all about. The social and emotional life of a 2-year-old is becoming more complex every day. They have begun to enjoy some interactive play, but usually remain involved in parallel play. doing the same activity as a partner, but not doing it together. For example, the two children may be playing house, but one is in the kitchen area pretending to make a meal, while the other is in the living room area pretending to vacuum the floor. Some 2-year-olds have learned to take turns, but it is often pretty difficult for them to do this. That ability tends to develop later on. In terms of self-image, 2-year-olds are beginning to develop pride in their own work. While a few months earlier they would make a painting and just walk away from it, now they often want to show it to someone and say, "See what I made?" Living with a 2-year-old can be a trying situation. It definitely has its ups and downs, but it's also an extremely satisfying experience.
Chapter 6, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
I don't know anyone who sleepwalks. However, I was just reading an article that says that millions of people do it every day, and that the rate is especially high among adolescents.
Will, I used to sleepwalk when I was a little girl. One night when I was about 6, my parents found me walking around down in the basement, totally asleep. When they asked me what I was doing, I said I was looking for rabbits.
Rabbits? Did you have a pet rabbit?
Nope. Who knows what I was thinking? I did it only once or twice, but when I did, it was kind of scary. My parents got really distraught one time when I got as far as the street corner.
Well, this article says that somnambulism is more common than most people think. It said that about 18% of Americans sleepwalk at some point in their lives. The author said that about 17% of children between the ages of 11 and 12 sleepwalk.
That's wild.
Sleepwalking can be very dangerous, and thousands of people are doing it every night. Some people fall out of windows or even try to drive cars. But the upside of this is that very few people ever get hurt sleepwalking, and most people outgrow it by the time they're 15 years old.
Thank goodness.
Section 2. Listening to a Lecture.
Today's lecture focuses on one aspect of dreaming that has fascinated mankind since the days of the ancient Greeks. Lucid dreams are a very special type of experience, quite unlike regular dreams. Regular dreams take place while the subject is asleep, and so do lucid dreams. However, there is one major difference. When you are having a lucid dream, you are dreaming while knowing that you are dreaming. People who have lucid dreams report that they are extremely colorful and exciting. It feels to them like the dream is more real than real life. Another exciting aspect of lucid dreaming is that the dreamer can control what takes place in the dream. In addition, the people who have them can almost always remember them perfectly. Not a single detail is lost. This is not true of most ordinary dreams. Over the years, researchers have developed ways of inducing lucid dreams. One involves the use of flickering lights. The changing patterns are thought to affect the brain waves in a particular way that brings about clear dreaming. Other ways to bring about such dreams are more complicated. One researcher suggests going to bed, sleeping for exactly 5 hours, getting up, and thinking about nothing except having lucid dreams for an hour, and then going back to bed again. He feels that there is something about this sequence of actions that clears the brain and makes way for lucid dreaming. Another way of entering the lucid dream state is equally complicated. With the oral focusing technique, the sleeper stays awake watching television until he or she feels extremely tired, completely ready to sleep. Then, the person turns down the TV so that the sound level is just above the ambient sound in the room. Then the subject lies down and focuses complete attention on the sound of the TV while imagining climbing an infinite number of stairs. If things work right, subjects soon find themselves in a room that looks exactly like the one they started out in. However, when they get up and look around, things seem very different. The dreamer will be able to hear the sound of the television, but we'll see nothing on the screen, or only a very blurry image, or sometimes one or two words appearing over and over again. Almost everyone is interested in lucid dreaming, although some people refuse to believe that it exists. For anyone who thinks they may have experienced it, there are several ways to check whether or not it is happening to you. When you are aware while you are actually having a dream, not afterward, that you are doing something impossible, such as flying, you may be having a lucid dream. If you are reading something in a dream, and you look away from the text and then look back at it again and the words have changed, this is a sign that you may be having a lucid dream. Researchers say there is a distinct difference between regular dreams and lucid dreams. There's still a lot of research to be done on this topic. Psychologists, mystics, and artists continue to discover new aspects of lucid dreaming all the time. Who knows? Maybe you'll meet up with one of them when they visit your dreams tonight.
Chapter 7, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
You know, I'm only 35 years old, but I've been working for 20 years. I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't working. I really enjoy being out there making money.
That's wild. Why did you start working when you were so young? Did your family need the money?
No, it wasn't that. There were only 2 children in my family, and my mother and father both had jobs. We had enough money to live on. I just liked the idea of paying my own way, especially for extravagances like fancy clothes and gold jewelry.
Me? I'd give anything if I could quit my job. I don't think I'd ever get tired of sitting around and doing nothing. Right now, I'm working part-time at a department store, making $12 an hour, and that suits me fine. I don't work evenings and I don't work weekends.
Well, I don't work evenings or weekends either, but I do put in some overtime. They pay me $14 an hour for it, so I make out okay. And besides, I really don't mind putting in a few extra hours. Say, what would you do if someone offered you $20 an hour to work full-time? Would you take the job?
No way. There isn't enough money to get me to work full-time.
What about if they offered you $40,000 a year to do something you liked, and they included medical benefits and paid vacation?
Well, I guess I'd have to take it. I don't like the idea, but that much money coupled with medical benefits would be hard to refuse.
Well, it might happen.
Right, in your dreams.
Section 2. Listening to a Lecture.
As your homework for next class, I'd like you to listen to a lecture on a webcast. You'll find the information on your assignment sheet. The webcast concerns a topic that is always controversial: free trade agreements and how they affect workers in the countries involved.
On the surface, free trade agreements seem to offer a good deal to the countries that sign them. When the United States, Mexico, and Canada signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, in 1994, hopes were high that it would benefit the economies of all 3 countries. And in some ways it has. The agreement eliminated duties on half of the goods shipped to Mexico. It also provided for a phasing out of other taxes on imported goods over the next 14 years. Restrictions were removed from many whole classes of items, such as automobiles, computers, textiles, and agricultural products. Corporations in all 3 countries benefited from increased trade. But what happened to the workers in these countries? In some cases, companies in the more developed nations grew, and workers were able to get promotions and earn more money. However, in some cases, workers were adversely affected. The U.S. has very strict labor laws which guarantee workers a living wage and require employers to provide safe working conditions and a reasonable amount of time off. Because companies could hire workers in Mexico to do the work more cheaply, many American workers' hours were cut back, and some lost their jobs entirely. People in less developed nations have also experienced negative effects from globalization. In order to be able to attract business, managers are under pressure to keep their prices low. Therefore, they try to keep wages low and also try to avoid giving employees medical benefits or paid vacation that their American counterparts receive. The managers can also save money by compromising on environmental safety regulations in factories. The ability of workers to organize in unions or groups to demand better wages and working conditions is also severely limited in many less developed countries. So, although there is more money to be made since the trade agreement, and there is more work to do, the workers are not necessarily reaping the benefits. In order to help American workers who have been negatively affected by trade agreements, the Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration has set up some special programs. Workers who lose their jobs or see their wages reduced because of an increase in foreign trade are eligible for the following benefits: job counseling, job search assistance, out-of-area job search and relocation allowances, and income support while enrolled in a training program sponsored by the Department of Labor. While the intentions of those who favor free trade agreements may be positive, the fallout from some of these agreements has been devastating to thousands of workers. It will take decades for some groups of workers and for some whole industries to get back on their feet again. Chapter 8, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
Thanks for letting me use your apartment while you were away. I really appreciated being able to have my parents spend those 5 days at your place, instead of having to put them in a hotel.
No problem. I really appreciate how clean you left the place. The kitchen has never looked so good. The bathroom is spotless. You straightened out everything in the front closet. And you did a great job washing the windows. The way you organized the medicine cabinet is unbelievable. And
Wait a minute. I just took care of the place the way I do my own. It took me 2 days to do it, but it was worth it.
it would take me 10 days and it still wouldn't look as good as this.
Oh, come on. You're a very good housekeeper. The place was fine when I came in. I just had to do a few little things.
Well, my theory is that some people are able to keep a place neat and others aren't. And I'm one of the latter types.
Well, you may be right. I guess I am fanatic about cleanliness.
Section 2. Listening to a lecture.
Good morning, students. Today, I'm going to share a secret with you. Contrary to popular opinion, we scientists are not always able to come up with exact provable information about all of the things we discover. Sure, science has a lot of tools at its command, but sometimes even the best tools don't help us tell the complete story. Take astronomy, for example. For years, we were sure that there are... how many planets?
9. At least that's what I was taught.
That's what they taught me too. But today, we're going to take a look at a new planet. You may have heard about it. It's way out there beyond Pluto, and some researchers aren't fully convinced that it's an actual planet. That's another example of how science doesn't always have all the answers. The technical name for this planet is 2003 UB 313. How's that for an easy-to-remember name? There will probably not be an official name for this planet for a long time. While scientists were looking at 2003 UB 313, they used the codename Xena because it was easier to say. Now, I usually just call it 313. But for a while there, it had another name. One of the astronomers who was working an all-night shift on the night it became clear that it was a planet had a 3-week-old daughter. At that point, he started calling the planet Lila in her honor. It's a touching story, but that probably won't be the official name either. So, to continue with what we know and don't know about 313. For one thing, it is the most distant object in orbit around the Sun. That is, until we find out that we missed something and there is an even more distant orbiting object out there. Its orbit is also much larger than that of Pluto. It takes 313 more than twice as long to orbit around the Sun as Pluto, a total of about 250 years. As with most objects that we discover in outer space, we don't really know how large 313 is.
Professor Warren, first you said some people aren't sure it's a planet. Now you're saying they don't really know how big it is?
That's right. Not all scientific information is exact. A lot of it is approximate.
Oh, I see. That's so surprising to me.
Anyway, we can't be really sure of how large 313 is because it's so far away, even using a powerful telescope. Because it's so far away, it's just a dot of light, so we have to look at how bright the dot is to help figure out its size. But then the brightness may depend on how reflective the surface of the planet. If it's very shiny, it may appear bigger than it actually is. Just one more thing that science hasn't been able to overcome, not yet anyway. So, that's the end of the lecture for today. I suggest that you take a look at the notes you took today before the next class. You might want to try summarizing your notes to be sure you understand all the ideas you wrote down. I'll tell you more about 313 during next week's lecture.
Chapter 9, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
You know, Jim, I watched the movie E.T. again last weekend. I just love that movie.
You watched it again? I don't believe it. You already watched it 5 times last week. Are you okay? Last week you stayed home to watch it instead of going to Marcy's party with me. I just don't understand. You must be crazy. I told Marcy, Alice is home watching E.T. again. And you know what she said?
What?
She said, don't give me that. No rational person would choose to stay home and watch a 25-year-old movie when she could be out with her friends. I'm worried about Alice.
Well, you guys just don't understand. I love that movie. It's like I have to see it at least once a week or I don't feel right.
I talked to my sister about it. I told her you'd watched it more than 500 times, and she said, is that really true? She thinks you may have a deep psychological problem of some sort.
You're kidding. Did she really say that? I'm not sick. It's just that I love movies, and especially that one.
Maybe you can take a little vacation from E.T. What do you say?
Well, I'll think about it.
Section 2. Listening to a Lecture.
Welcome to today's edition of Today's Music. Today we're going to hear about the history of one of the most vital musical forms out there today, hip-hop. We are really fortunate to have with us a man who knows more about hip-hop than almost anyone else alive. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Lee of Prentice University. He's spent the last 20 years following the developments in this field.
Thanks, Stacy. I'm glad to be here. Well, I guess I'll start out with the basics, just in case there's anyone out there in the audience who doesn't know about the roots of hip-hop. First of all, it's a style of popular music that's been growing and changing for almost 40 years. I believe it's the most exciting musical form to come along since the birth of jazz. It got its start in the African American and Latino cultures in large inner-city neighborhoods. Most hip-hop songs feature a rapper. Rappers don't exactly sing. They say the words in intense rhythmic patterns, accompanied by an instrumental track. Often the track consists only of drums and other rhythm instruments. The raps themselves usually take the form of stories having to do with real events in the lives of the rappers. Hip-hop began in New York City when DJ stands for disc jockey, someone who plays records at a dance club, started taking the rhythm track from a disco or funk song and playing it all by itself as they talked to the dancers. With the rhythm track in the background, the DJ would greet new arrivals, tell jokes, talk to people in the audience, and encourage the dancers to keep on dancing. Old-school hip-hop flourished from 1970 to about 1984. It originated at block parties in New York City, especially in the Bronx. The 1980s saw the diversification of hip-hop. Soon many different styles of hip-hop emerged, including Jamaican dub, gangsta rap, and G-funk. By the early 1990s, hip-hop had become mainstream. The rapper Curtis Blow did a rap commercial for the soft drink Sprite, and soon other advertisers jumped on the bandwagon. Most people consider the golden age of hip-hop to be the years from 1986 through 1993, when gang-related violence claimed the lives of two extremely popular rapper rivals, the notorious B.I.G. and Tupac Shakur. Unfortunately, neither crime has been solved. As time has passed, hip-hop has come to describe a whole cultural movement that goes way beyond singers and dancers. The clothing worn by the original hip-hop musicians has grown into a gigantic worldwide industry. Some of the signature styles are baggy pants, worn low around the waist, heavy gold neck chains and rings, colorful sneakers, and do-rags. A do-rag is a piece of cloth, usually black or white, that is wrapped tightly around the head and knotted in the back. Sometimes a baseball cap is worn over the top of the do-rag. Since the 1990s, many hip-hop aficionados have also begun to focus on the bling-bling. This term describes extremely fancy possessions, such as jewelry, cars, and designer clothing that project an expensive lifestyle.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
My pleasure. Chapter 10, Section 1. Listening to a Conversation.
You know, Martin, I'd really like us to spend the weekend at my aunt's house. We could drive out there on Friday night and come back Monday morning just in time for work.
Your aunt's house? We just visited her, didn't we?
That was last October.
Oh.
On Saturday morning, we could visit my cousins on the farm, and in the afternoon, we could take Aunt Ethel for a ride in the country. Doesn't that sound cool?
Well, not exactly. I was planning to go bowling with the guys Friday night, and Saturday I was planning to get the car fixed and mow the lawn. We really shouldn't drive the car the way it is.
Well, that's true. How about if we go out there on Saturday night instead of Friday? Would that work better for you?
Yes, it would. But I was really hoping to spend the weekend at home.
We've been home the last 10 weekends in a row. I have a lot of work to do too, but we really need to get away.
I guess you're right. But can we agree to come back on Sunday if it doesn't turn out to be fun?
That sounds like a good plan. You never know how things will go. I'll go call Aunt Ethel.
Section 2. Listening to a Lecture.
Well, I guess we should get started. This is the third installment in the Harry McDonald School of Law Guest Lecture Series. Now, I know that all of you out there are studying hard to become the best lawyers you can be. You're learning everything you can about litigation so that you can win as many court cases as possible. However, today we have invited a guest lecturer to present an alternative to litigation, to arguing things out in court. This alternative is called mediation. It's extremely useful in some cases, and it is one of the things I will test you on. And here to tell us more about it is Dr. Lily Mayfield.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I know that all of you have heard of mediation, but I'm not sure how much you know about the ins and outs of the process, so I'll start at the beginning. Mediation is a voluntary and quite informal process through which someone well-trained in legal issues helps two parties, or sometimes more than two parties, come to an agreement. As you know, these well-trained mediators are often lawyers. So, what is the difference between mediation and litigation? Here are two key points. These would probably make good exam questions. First of all, with litigation, each of the people having the disagreement hires a lawyer. and those two lawyers argue things out in court while the people with the problem look on. With mediation, the two people with the problem agree to work with a single mediator to find a mutually agreeable solution to their disagreement. The second main point is that the mediator makes no decisions about how the case will be resolved. This allows the two parties to work out their own solution in private, rather than having an unknown result imposed on them by a judge or a jury in an often lengthy and expensive process.
Excuse me, Dr. Mayfield. Could you explain some of the other benefits of using mediation rather than litigation to solve a problem?
Certainly. First of all, when you go the mediation route, the whole thing is a voluntary process. No one tells either person what he or she has to do, although the mediator can offer good advice based on case law, if asked. Secondly, all of the discussions are private and confidential and take place in the mediator's office, not in a courtroom. Thirdly, mediation is always less expensive and almost always quicker than litigation. It's less expensive because the two parties are paying a single fee instead of two. It's usually quicker because the two parties are in control of the discussions, instead of having two lawyers talking to each other and then going to court for rulings, which takes a lot of time.
So, what kinds of cases usually go the mediation route?
All kinds of cases. One of the most popular uses of mediation is to make arrangements when a couple is getting a divorce. The typical divorce, if a house and children are involved, costs each party about $12,000 to $15,000 for a total of at least $25,000. A mediated divorce typically costs less than $7,000. Now here is one caveat. The couple will have to do a lot of legwork themselves to save money. They'll have to research all bank accounts and investments, find key documents, create a current budget as a married couple, and a proposed budget for each after the divorce, and a lot of other things. But the financial savings are tremendous.
Listening, Speaking, Placement Test. Section 1. Number 1. When did Steve get in? Number 2. How much time will you have to spend in Boston? Number 3. Has she ever been there before? Number 4. How much is the subway fare? Number 5. Should we try to get to the 8 o'clock movie? Number 6. Do you think that this jacket fits? Number 7. What are your preferences in art? Number 8. What are your hopes for your niece? Number 9. On the way home from the doctor, did you stop for some milk? Number 10. Couldn't you have arrived an hour later? Section 2. Number 11. Peter is a lawyer like his mother. Number 12. Mary's flight was due at 1, but it was delayed an hour and a half. Number 13. 60 students signed up for the sailing trip, but most of them failed to show up. Number 14. Judy's got big plans for her birthday. Number 15. Peter was beaten fairly quickly by Steve in the tennis match. Number 16. In the heat of the argument, Mary lost sight of her original disagreement with John. Number 17. Although Gary liked his Uncle Robert, he was fonder of his cousin Peter. Number 18. Considering the season, you really should plant the seeds in the garden before the frost. Number 19. On the whole, the dinner was great. Number 20. John's never been invited to the club by his brother. Section 3. Number 21.
The weather has been so hot this summer.
And we haven't had rain like this in years.
What does the woman mean? Number 22.
The restaurant wasn't very good, in my opinion.
I thought it couldn't have been nicer.
What does the man mean? Number 23.
The storm sounded like it would blow the roof off my house.
Wasn't it terrible? The flood in our basement ruined my son's paintings.
What did the storm do? Number 24.
My brother is having a lot of trouble finding a job.
What a surprise. I haven't seen him lift a finger.
What does the woman mean? Number 25.
Your serve. Whew, it's gotten very hot.
I know, but I'm used to playing tennis in weather like this.
What does the man mean? Number 26.
The less I try to whack the ball, the farther it goes.
That's quite a paradox.
What does the woman mean? Number 27.
Richard told me about this store. He said they have the lowest prices in town.
You think? I don't necessarily buy that.
What does the man mean? Number 28.
Did you hear that City Hall almost burned down?
Right, and then the mayor was removed under fire.
What does the woman mean? Number 29.
How's the pizza here?
Good, by and large, especially the mushroom and cheese.
What does the man mean? Number 30.
That young man got 20 years for stealing a bicycle.
The judge sure handed down a hard sentence.
What does the man mean? Section 4.
This is the TALK Lost Pet Watch. Tonight we are telling you about 3 missing pets. Blackie is a black and white kitten, 6 months old, who ran away from her owner, Mrs. Lincoln. Her house is next to the high school.
And then, Oxen, a large German Shepherd, is a guide dog for John Wilson, who's been blind since birth. Mr. Wilson cannot get around without his dog. Oxen was last seen running through the Green Acres neighborhood. He's wearing a black collar and has a big scar over his left eye. Also, Winston, a wire-haired terrier, was taken from Mrs. Thompson's backyard. Winston is a prize-winning purebred worth about $3,000.
If you have any information, please call our studio at 1-800-PET-HELP. The police station no longer handles missing animal reports. The animal shelter's phone is broken and won't be repaired for a week. Stay tuned for news here at 103.7.
Part 1.
This evening, I am going to talk about product placement. Product placement is probably one of the most important concepts I will cover this semester. In the United States, special care is taken when placing items in different parts of the supermarket. For example, candy is generally placed next to the cashier or checkout counter. This is because customers are often likely to grab a candy bar while waiting in line. Children who are waiting in line with their parents often pester their parents to buy candy for them. Another example has to do with the placement of expensive products.
Part 2.
Now, where was I? Right. Well, many stores in the U.S., not all, will place expensive products at eye level. Imported shampoos, for example, are placed at a level where they are clearly visible and people can easily reach for them. Please note that I'm not supporting or endorsing cheap items over expensive ones. Before we end this evening, I want to talk about your next assignment. Though you might not think of it as homework, I expect each of you to go to a large supermarket before next Tuesday to see where the over-the-counter medicine is placed. I look forward to hearing about your findings in a week.
The final selection.
Hello, class. Today we're going to be talking about folk wisdom. Every culture has many sayings that give advice about life. These sayings are part of what is commonly called folk wisdom. Of course, folk wisdom is also expressed in other ways, such as myths, fairy tales, legends, and songs. Often, however, folk wisdom is shared in the form of short sayings about the best ways to approach life's joys and sorrows. Today, we'll look at some of the humorous sayings of three famous Americans: Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, and Mark Twain. Then I'll ask you to share some examples of folk wisdom from your own communities. One characteristic of American folk wisdom is its humor. Humor makes the bitter medicine of life easier to swallow. Ben Franklin was the first of many Americans to be admired for his humorous folk wisdom. Franklin himself loved to have fun. He liked to eat a lot, drink a lot, and be merry, but he always told others to practice moderation.